we do a quadrant exercise that I'll show you, and we do some envisioning of a better world. We encourage people to kind of write a collective story about what that might look like. And then actions and solutions is a very, very important part of the conversation, where people might look at specifics to their locality or something broader, and then supporting each other. And I'm just wondering if someone's not muted, because I hear a voice. If everyone could just mute. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on. So the KTCC that we've developed has a facilitator resource and a companion to that, and it's a companion to the presenter slides. And I'm just going to take you for a moment to our website that is still being worked up, but it's almost done. And if you look here, you can see there are two types of facilitator guides, an editable one and a PDF, and then there's presenter slides that go with them. And then here you have all the different sections of the KTCC that I just outlined, nicely presented to you here. And so you would go through these, and depending on what your group is going to talk about, you can pull out resources that would be useful to the group. So we have the introduction, the science and impacts, and so on. So that's an invaluable resource that you can make use of. I'm going to go back to where I was, and I'm going to move on down. So about planning the conversation, there's of course lots to talk about. So one important thing to do is to know your group, and we are suggesting people either make up or use one of our surveys to send out to the people you're planning to invite. You have to narrow in on certain slides or details in each section and tailor the choice of material to the group. So you might choose to concentrate on the local impacts in the science and impacts section. We have some great slides about how climate change is affecting Ontario specifically, for example, and Toronto also, but there's a lot of information there. You can send resources in advance for people to have done some thinking, or you can promise them afterwards. You can think about whether you're going to suggest a second conversation, and you should practice your conversation in advance, leaving enough space for discussion, which is what I did. And I'm hoping I'm leaving enough space for discussion. The next two slides here are about how to facilitate online. And I'm not going to spend much time on them, because we actually have in our third session on March 29th, a whole hour about how to facilitate online. But there are some key things. It should be a 2-hour program. As Lynn said earlier, we suggest 5 to 10 people per conversation, so that people feel comfortable talking. And the rest of this is sort of technical. I'm going to leave it so we can have some conversation. This talks about some ideas for managing the conversation. People have been using this already tonight. I think people are getting more and more very capable with Zoom, and these are all pretty common ideas, and we will be coming back to them anon. So what I'm going to show you now is just a few slides from the presenter slides, and show you how they're linked to the facilitator resource. So for example, this is a slide about the science of climate change, and these are 2 videos. And here is the facilitator resource page that goes along with those slides. So it gives you talking points for them and ideas of how you might use them in a conversation. And then I'm just going to show you one other slide. It also has talking points in the facilitator's guide. And it's a pretty scary map showing what would happen if the world warmed to 4 degrees, which is where it will go if we don't do something about it. And it really shows you the inequities that would result from that, the global south being the most impacted. Then I wanted to show you a slide from the Science of Social Change, because it's very heartening, really. And this is a study that Erica Chenoweth did about how if 3.5% of a population challenge a government, the government has to do something about that challenge. And 3.5% would equal about 85,000 people in Toronto. It would equal 1 million people across Canada. And just a note here, I don't know how many of the rest of you belong to Lead Now, which is, I think, a fantastic organization that was started by a bunch of young people in the Harper years, and they were very much online, and now they do in-person actions as well. But if I'm not mistaken, they have 500,000 people on their in their database. I think they do. So they're, you know, it wouldn't take too much to get to 1 million people. Another thing that you might want to do if you're thinking about facilitating is tailoring your conversation. Oops, this is covering, anyways, to talk about local impacts. And there's some questions here that you can ask yourself. For example, what are some local impacts of the climate emergency and injustice? Perhaps you could find photographs, examples, or tell a personal story. You may have people in your group whose country is not, their home country is not Canada. And as we learned from Sarah, you know, how important it is to know the international context. So you can make use of the resources in your group. And then I wanted to share with you this Quadrant Activity, which is something that we get people to do in the action piece of the conversation. And sometimes you poll, like I've watched Colleen, who's one of our most experienced facilitators, do this, and she polls people for what they might want to talk about. And you might know this already because you've discussed with the group or you have a particular interest. But just for example, for sake of argument, let's say the group wants to really zero in on reducing dependence on fossil fuels, which is, of course, the biggie. So then you as facilitator would prepare an editable and screen share an editable doc, and you could actually write on here people's suggestions. So how do we reduce dependency on fossil fuels at an individual level, at a community level? What must the government do to reduce our dependency there? And of course, industry. And it's a brainstorming tool that can help the group focus on what it wants to do next. And this is the last slide in the presenter slides. And the reason it's included here is twofold. One is because Catherine Hayhoe, who is featured here, is a wonderful scientist, Canadian scientist in the States, who really explains the climate crisis very clearly. So she's a great person to have people watch. But the other reason that I've included this slide here, that we've included this slide here, is because after this presentation that I'm doing with you right now and our discussion, we're going to go into new breakout groups with professional people who know how to talk about these very difficult questions. And so that's where we're going next. So I forgot to mention at the beginning of all this that if you have questions, to note where, you know, the slide that you had questions about, and we could go back to it. But in the meantime, I'll stop sharing and see if you have any questions, or you want to revisit any part of what I've said. Anybody questions or comments or thoughts?
I have one.
Sure.
Once you got the group, it seems straightforward. But my big question is, what about where do you find the group to have a kitchen table conversation with? Like that, how do you round them up? How do you detect them? How do you engage with them?
Okay. Well, I can begin a answer to that, but I know there are others in the room who, like Sharon over here, who might have something more to say about that, and Katie. Oh, and Sarah, who's here too. So there's quite a few committee members on this in this breakout group. But I'll just speak for myself. I'm planning to get together neighbors. So, you know, I know a lot of my neighbors as, you know, human beings and kind of what they do and so on. But I've started to talk to each of them about a kitchen table climate conversation, and they're amazingly receptive. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm just going to pull together, I think, you know, 8 women who inhabit the same street as me, and start there. And I know, Sharon, did you want to speak about the going beyond the community? Or?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I think you put your finger on one of the biggest challenges, David, because the one that I organized, I reached out to friends and friends of friends, and they came together and we held one. It was early days, so, but it looked a lot like this, except it was in real life before COVID. And I haven't held one since. And I'm increasingly thinking that the important thing is to reach out to people who are connected with groups and see if they'd be interested in having a presentation, low risk, an evening or afternoon, whatever fits. Because existing groups, you know, have a natural cohesiveness. So if I were to go in and present, there would be a common perspective, common interest, and the possibility of action afterwards would be greater. So it's something that I haven't experimented with, but in the group that where we're looking at outreach, we're thinking that could be quite productive, as a means of extending outside of, you know, my personal family and immediate friends, and maybe even getting outside of the climate bubble, because that's one of the challenges that I think we face. So, you know, I wished I had more specific thoughts on it, but this is where I think I want to head. So I'll pass this over to maybe Katie or someone else
Okay.
would like to say.
Sorry, I just think Margie had, or
Okay.
Margie, sorry.
Thank you.
Had something.
Hi. We have two quite active climate groups in Peterborough. And we went to the last kitchen table sessions in Toronto, some of us. So we've been thinking about this, but my particular question, and we did get so far and then we got diverted, but I was wondering if you see there is any benefit in including not just our neighbors, but beyond that, to the people that we appeal to, which is, in our case, is a lot of it is our local council, or whether that's not helpful. I'm thinking because it becomes, I don't want to say combative, but actually I think that's some of the feeling that it's a them and us thing, because they have a lot of power to make changes. Whether we're talking about transportation, which tends to be a constant ask, and whether there is any usefulness in including people who are not just our neighbors, but have some power to make change, to hear around a kitchen table what you know, people's real concerns are, as opposed to having it come at them as a plea at the council level.
I know Katie wants to speak. I just wanted to respond to that. I think that's a fabulous idea. One thing that we've been noticing is how poorly informed some of the politicians are around the climate science, for example. And I know that there are some groups that are working with the federal MPs on that, but city councilors, you know, are more accessible, and the idea of, you know, getting them around a kitchen table sounds marvelous. I think it's great. Katie, did you want to speak? And then Alan, I think. Oh, and
Yeah,
Eddie.
I just want to support what Sharon's saying and what you've said, Val, and really what everyone said. It gives you a little leg up if you can find something that ties a group of people together, like your neighbors. That's already a cohesive group in a way. Just because they've got something, you know, in common, they might not be a cohesive group of people. Actually, it depends. But if you know, if you have something that can just like bring you into the room together at first, you know, they're big conversations, and they're conversations that really get people going, and for good reason. And they're conversations everybody has their own experiences with. And so the more that you can have something that's got you together, it's a good way to get to know one another. So it doesn't necessarily have to be people that you know really well. So it doesn't need to be your family or best friends. It's a good way to get to know people, you know, as long as something brings you. Sarah's saying, you know, why don't you start with community groups, even residents of a building if you live in an apartment building. That is just a good practical way to organize people. Like, it takes the logistical bit off of your shoulders. If you can just say to a school, you know, can we come and talk with the class? The class is already there. They do the outreach, and then you just come and engage with a new group. And the benefit of that too is it's not necessarily an overtly climate focused group, but you'll find probably everybody in there is going to have such a diverse set of opinions about the content matter anyway. So yeah, I would just say something that can help you with the logistical bit of organizing it, and then also just something that you can, just a jumping off point that you can start from, whether it's neighbors or your church group or something like that. Can I pass it to Betty? I think you had your hand up, Betty.
Yes, Betty, and then Alan. Betty, you need to unmute your mic.
Okay. Is anybody here familiar with meetup groups? Yeah. So, I mean, I used to be quite active with a meetup group that I own called Climate Change Toronto. And the motto is knowledge before activism. So, and I'd like very much to bring it back to life with KTCC, and I'm looking forward to having a better look at the materials available, and the fact that you can that there are experts available. Right now I have a physics group, and we average about 70 people for physics. So I think we could do it for climate change, hopefully. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, that's wonderful. Great idea. Alan was, or was it Linda? Somebody there.
Just a note, we've got about a minute and a half left, so just to let you know.
Great. We had a group here that went to Toronto and was trained in this, and when we tried it out on friends here, we found that it really was too much on the agenda. You can't really deal with the emotional effects in 10 minutes. You can't really deal with the science effects in 10 minutes. And so I just was dismayed when I saw the agenda again is very, very crammed. So is it better to do it in 2 evenings and spread it out? Because 10 minutes for, just isn't enough for each of those topics.
That's a really great question, and I might get cut off, but I will just say that, yeah, absolutely. I think that, it's a starting spot for a group, and the group would likely want to meet again. Whether the facilitator meets with them or if a host has brought that group together, maybe the host will then keep working with the group and the facilitator will move on to help other groups. So it's a fluid, sort of agenda actually. And I agree with you that that's why a pre-survey might help. So if people, are feeling anxious about the science, then more time would be spent on that.